Callie Michael representing the College Board. Today we have Trevor Packer, who is the Senior Vice President, and he's the head of the Advanced Placement Program for the College Board since 2003. We also have Chad Hoagie, who is an AP U.S. History teacher at the Fulton County Schools at Centennial High School, which is in Roswell.
Okay. Thank you so much. We do have 10 minutes per side, and I would ask the College Board to make their presentation first.
Yeah, pull that mic close.
Make sure that that mic is on.
Can you hear me okay? Is this picking up? Yeah. Great. My name's Trevor Packer, as Callie introduced, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. It's inspiring to see democracy in action. And frankly, if I had heard the concerns that many of you have heard about AP US history, I would be calling for just this sort of hearing. So I admire and respect the time you're dedicating to examining the facts for yourself. And I'd very much like that to be the focus of this hearing today, for us to look at these materials together, for the College Board to receive feedback, because this hearing happens during our public review period for AP US history. So that's terrific. We'll be able to take the feedback we receive from you and incorporate that into the work we're doing with college professors and AP teachers to make edits to the AP framework this summer. So we appreciate the timing of this. We appreciate your dedication to this forum and this conversation. I think this conversation has been confused with Common Core debates. And so I want to single out one very important difference between AP courses and the Common Core. As many of you know who may be concerned about the Common Core was designed to be a curriculum for all students in all grade levels. AP is very different. AP is not a standard course. It is a college level course designed to help a student earn college credit while still in high school. And these are elective courses. So what that means is that there are not schools that require students to take AP instead of a regular course. These are electives that students have the opportunity to choose to take if they already have a foundation in a discipline and want to pursue advanced studies, or if they're especially motivated or supported by their local education system. For the 60 years that the AP program has operated here in Georgia, Georgia has consistently applied a policy of respecting local control of school board selection regarding which AP courses are offered. The College Board applauds that. There are some states that do not support local control for AP courses and put in place policies that require schools to offer AP. Georgia is not one of those states. Georgia has historically respected local control and has given school boards and superintendents the liberty to choose whether to offer these elective AP courses or not. So one of the things that has concerned us about the debate here in Georgia has been a conflation of Common Core issues and AP that does not seem to represent an accurate understanding of the AP program. We've been limited to 10 minutes for these opening remarks, and I think that's great because we want to spend the time hearing questions, looking at the material together, and receiving your feedback. So in the remaining minutes, I would like you to hear from a teacher because the voices that have been most missing from this conversation here in Georgia and elsewhere have been the voices of teachers and students. Mr. Hoagie is a teacher who is not one of the hundreds of Georgia teachers that scores AP US history exams. He's not one of the college professors that develop AP US history. I felt that when given the opportunity to bring someone with me, it would be most helpful to all of us to have someone with fresh eyes, someone who has taught the old AP framework, taught the new AP framework, and who isn't already within the group of people here in Georgia that score AP exams and tend to be more loyal to the AP program. So with that, without further ado, I'd like Mr. Hoagie to present his view as an AP US history teacher on the new and the old frameworks.
So the first thing I'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about myself. I'm born and raised in Georgia. I'm both an employee and a product of Fulton County Schools. I've taught AP World History for 10 years, and as Trevor said, I'm brand new to AP US History. I've taught it for just 2 years. And so I'm not vested in the old framework. I'm not closely associated with those that are. And I'm bringing to you the perspective of a high school teacher that read SR 80 and was really, quite frankly, bothered by it and a little hurt by it, frankly. So according to SR 80, the AP US History framework differs radically from the Georgia Performance Standards, and the A-push themes and concepts would be taught to the detriment of the mandated Georgia Performance Standards. Here's where it sort of touches me personally as a teacher, because I pride myself on the fact that I follow the curriculum, both the Georgia Performance Standards and the framework that's set out by AP. And so SR 80 makes these claims that people like me are omitting or minimizing the material. I can assure you that I do not minimize the Declaration of Independence or religion's role in our history. In fact, considering that the framework mentions religion 31 times, students in my class will have a much more comprehensive understanding of the impact of religion on our nation's history than a student who was taking a traditional on-level class driven only by the Georgia Performance Standards. Also, this question about the Founding Fathers, I think this is really just a misunderstanding. From my perspective as a teacher and somebody who lives and breathes history, when I read the curriculum framework, I saw the Founding Fathers in it. There's a document that's been provided to you that I created that's called SR 80, the rest of the story. It's in the folder from College Board that you've been given. I'd like you to take a look at that document. And
First document on the left of the packet.
so what I've done in this document is basically laid the AP framework next to the Georgia Performance Standards so that you can make decisions for yourself. And the part that I'd like to draw your attention to right now is the Founding Fathers. Here is how a U.S. history teacher reads the framework. You'll see my footnotes at the bottom. So I'd like you to take a moment to look through that, and I think what you'll find is that all of the Founding Fathers required by the Georgia Performance Standards are being taught in Georgia's classrooms. They certainly are being taught in my classroom. And what's happening here is that the framework is actually creating flexibility so that the curriculum can be satisfied. This subject is supposed to be taught in all 50 states under several different curricular requirements. The fact that the names and events are left out allows for that flexibility. It allows the teacher to satisfy the local requirements. So with that, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about how I plan. I sit at my dining room table every Saturday with my laptop in the center and the Georgia Performance Standards on one side and the AP framework on the other. First thing I do is go through the Georgia Performance Standards, identify every name, every event, everything I'm required to teach. And then I plug that into the framework as illustrative examples. So with this said, I feel pretty confident that students in Georgia are getting a balanced history of America, that students are getting the Georgia Performance Standards thoroughly taught to them.
Give us your name again.
Chad Hoagie.
Chad.
Yes.
All right. Yes, my name is Stanley Kurtz. I want to express my gratitude to Senator Ligon and to the Joint Committee for inviting me to give testimony today on the controversy over the changes to the College Board's Advanced Placement U.S. History program. I testify today as someone who has written on education issues for National Review Online and other journals of policy and opinion for nearly 15 years. I have a doctorate in social anthropology from Harvard University and have taught in interdisciplinary programs at Harvard University and the University of Chicago. I've used this academic background in the course of my investigative journalism, and it is primarily as an investigative journalist with a special interest in education issues that I testify today, having traced the intellectual background of the College Board's controversial new AP US History framework. I should add that a number of the interdisciplinary influences on the College Board's new history framework stem from intellectual currents which were central to my anthropological training, such as the emphasis on transnational cultural flows. Also, when I jointly taught a course in the classics of social and political theory at Harvard's Committee on Degrees in Social Studies, I was asked to present a lecture on Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Proceeding now to the nub of the issue, I believe we are here today because the College Board has made a decision to fundamentally transform the teaching of American history. In the past, teachers were simply given a brief 5-page list of topics to cover for the test. The great advantage of this method is that it allowed teachers to present American history from a wide range of perspectives. Teachers could take a traditionalist or a modern approach, a conservative or a liberal approach, or anything in between, and still see their students do well on the test. Now all of that has changed, and that is why we are here. Now, instead of a brief 5-page topical outline, The College Board has issued 80 pages of detailed guidance. The important point is not simply that the new framework is much longer than the old topical outline, but that the framework now seeks to control how teachers and students ought to think about American history. Instead of simply telling teachers what topics to cover, the College Board is telling them how to treat and present those topics. The token amount of flexibility that remains for teachers is only flexibility within sharp and deeply controversial lines that have already been drawn by the College Board. It's true, as the College Board says, that the new framework has been shaped by contemporary scholarly perspectives on major issues in U.S. history. The problem is a great deal of contemporary scholarship on American history is driven by a political agenda. This new, sharply revisionist and highly politicized scholarly agenda seeks to de-emphasize America's national story and to focus instead on global developments. This new historical revisionism is also far more focused on recounting injustices, real and alleged, of American history than on explaining or exploring our founding principles. This new historical revisionism focuses on themes of race, gender, class, and ethnicity, not merely in addition to, but at the expense of, a focus on America's unique qualities or on the principles required for responsible citizenship in a constitutional republic. To allow this framework to stand would effectively be to surrender democratic control over what Georgia's children are taught to politicized and frankly sharply left-leaning academics who dominate America's colleges and universities today. If you doubt that the state of affairs in America's history departments is as bad as all that, I would urge you to consult an article published this very week by one of our most esteemed American historians, Gordon Wood, in the Weekly Standard. A generally liberal-leaning historian, respected by conservatives and liberals alike, Wood says that the new generation of American historians is literally, quote, no longer interested in how the United States came to be, end quote. He calls them, quote, moral critics who denounce the values of the past in order to somehow reform our present, end quote. So far focused are these scholars on, quote, isolating and recovering stories of the dispossessed, end quote, such as injustices to the Indians, the slaves, and to women, says Wood, that they, quote, have difficulty writing any coherent national narrative at all, one that would account for how the United States as a whole came into being, end quote, and in any case avoid doing so for fear of bolstering patriotic sentiment. Sadly, every one of these problems affects the College Board's new AP US History framework. The framework de-emphasizes or completely eliminates themes like the intellectual background of our constitutional system, the principles of the free enterprise system, the unique role of faith traditions in American society as opposed to more secular European societies, and America's emphasis on state and local governments within a federalist system in contrast to the more centralized states of Europe. All of these things are part of what is sometimes called American exceptionalism, the qualities that make America distinctive and, yes, admirable as a country. In their place, the framework repeatedly emphasizes the injustices of American history and the clashing interests of race, class, gender, and ethnicity. The framework's insistence on framing itself around a global Atlantic world seems at times almost to obliterate America as the subject of its own history. And let me emphasize that the connection between these scholarly approaches and the framework is very direct. This is where you can consult with the two pieces you have in your folder that I've written investigating the intellectual background of the framework. One is called How the College Board Politicized U.S. History, and the other is called Why the College Board Demoted the Founders. Can the framework be fixed? I don't believe it can be. First, the College Board has undermined trust by publishing such an ideologically slanted document in the first place. But there's more to it than that. While America very much needs a unifying national narrative, one of the secrets of this country's success is the way we accommodate difference by allowing for choice. We are a very polarized country right now, both politically and culturally. It's gotten to the point where we can't even decide whether to call our foes Islamist terrorists or violent extremists. Why then should we expect to see a single national framework for the teaching of advanced U.S. history? Now that the College Board has decided to take such a heavy hand in what are, if in effect, curriculum decisions properly left to the states. It is on the verge of turning into a national school board. By issuing detailed guidelines for every single AP test, the College Board is effectively making an end run around our federalist system. AP U.S. history is only the beginning. Soon the College Board is going to create detailed frameworks for U.S. government and politics, European history, and many more. Soon it will be unaccountable and highly politicized professors at universities far outside of Georgia who will in effect be making decisions about education that ought by rights to be in the hands of the voters of Georgia and their representatives. The solution I suggest is for states dissatisfied with the College Board's new history framework to explore testing alternatives, exactly as the resolution before you proposes. While it would be premature to go into details, there are already efforts underway to create such alternatives, and I believe those efforts will come to maturity within the next 1 to 2 years. It's time for Georgia and other states that may not share the ideological biases of the College Board's new framework to explore alternatives, a move which could help open up choice for states across the country. Of course, the College Board will say that Georgia's students benefit from the college credit and the application credential provided by its AP testing program, and so they do. But why should the College Board be allowed to use its current position as an AP testing monopoly to force states to buy into an ideologically biased curriculum? Explore alternative testing options, and you could get the very same benefits without being forced to carry the unwelcome ideological baggage. There is good reason to believe that this issue is not about to disappear. Quite the contrary. I believe that the controversy over the College Board's AP history changes and over the changes the College Board is about to make to all of its AP tests is only going to grow. The new history framework was sprung on the public with virtually no real notice. That left critics with little time to mobilize. But now the process is well underway. I believe you're going to see a great many scholars and public figures coming out publicly in opposition to the new framework in the coming months and years. And as the College Board issues new frameworks for all of its other tests, I believe the movement of opposition will grow. So expect to see more, rather than fewer, of your constituents up in arms about this issue in the future. Now let me take up a critically important issue heretofore.
You've got about 20 seconds.
I'm going to be showing you some material from the new textbook that conforms to the framework. Very disturbing material that shows exactly what the students will be taught and what they will learn based on the framework.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for
Hang on a
Ms.
minute.
Yes.
They're going to pose the question
That-
first to College Board. College Board will answer. When their questions are exhausted, then you and Representative Dudley will pose questions.
To ask Mr. Krager, but before you do, would you tell us a little bit about yourself so that
Well, wait a
we
minute, I
know
want College Board to answer the
Okay.
questions about the framework.
okay, about the framework, that there's flexibility within the framework?
Yes.
Would you, I guess, repeat your statement that you'd made on that, or address that, or why you feel there's flexibility within the framework?
Yes, absolutely. The way I understand the framework is that it is just that, a framework for the actual material to be plugged in through illustrative examples. So we're given guidelines, and then I'm free to choose as a teacher, as a professional, but also most importantly based on the Georgia performance standards, what material to use to prove the arguments or to disprove the arguments that are set forth in the framework.
Okay. If you'd tell us about yourself first, and then
Well, wait a
My
minute
name's
now.
Larry Krieger. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've taught since 1970. I began my teaching career at Olympic High School in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent the next 35 years.
Most helpful, we could look at the old test questions compared to the new questions, and you could judge for yourselves whether teachers now have more flexibility. I've got those both in your packet if you'd like to look at them. We could have Mr. Hoagie talk about whether the new questions give him more flexibility. What would be most helpful to you?
just tell
If you can
us.
direct us to a page.
Great. So why don't you look at so in the blue packet on the right folder, you'll see some slides. We'll just show you some before and after questions. You can judge for yourself whether these give your teachers more flexibility and pay more respect to your state's fine standards. Look on page 4. You'll see on page 4 The old AP US history, as Mr. Krieger has said, had a very short statement. It was a short framework. And for civil rights, it simply said expanding movements for civil rights. But then guess what question showed up on the AP test? What if your teacher chose to focus on the Greensboro Four? What if your teacher chose to focus on Selma or Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks? Look at the question that showed up on the old AP exam. The question about civil rights was, the National Organization for Women was founded in 1966 in order to, you'll see that old multiple choice section, which had many more multiple choice questions than are on the new exam, did not provide teachers flexibility. It put pressure on your teachers to cover all sorts of stuff that was in other states' standards. What we've done with the new framework is attempted to establish a national consensus around what is required for college credit. We've deliberately not put names into the framework, by and large, because we want teachers to use their state standards to fill in the names. Look at the new, just flip over to page 5 and you'll see the new AP test question by comparison, a sample new question. We've reduced the number of multiple choice questions. Now we have a longer outline, as you can see on page 5. Seeking to fulfill Reconstruction era promises, civil rights activists and political leaders achieved some legal and political successes in ending segregation, although progress toward equality was slow and halting. The new exam question gives teachers the flexibility and the students to get points for the example their teachers chose. Briefly explain one specific example of civil rights activism that curtailed segregation between 1945 and 1980. If you flip the page to page 6, you see it on the old exam, your students had to answer questions about Massachusetts policy. Page 6, the topic in the framework was colonial government, but who knew? What would show up on the AP exam? A test question about Massachusetts education policy. You can see on page 7, the new AP exam. A longer description for the teachers. They can then use their state standards to populate that content. And the test question says, briefly describe one factor that enabled the New England colonies to develop a thriving economy. Now, I agree with Mr. Krieger. I agree with Mr. Krieger that multiple choice questions do require one correct response. And so we need to ensure that this framework is free of ideological bias. I agree fully with Professor Kurtz as well. An AP framework has no business being ideologically biased in any way. So we want feedback during this public review process that will help us ensure that there is no bias in that framework. We've already heard some really great examples that we can commit to change already. We're eager for the public review period to complete on February 28th so that we can make these changes. I'll stop there.
Okay. That's fine. Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. For the record, I have a child in AP US history right now. And when I asked his teacher what he thought of the new framework, he said it was too left for me. And I don't look at, we can pull cherry-picked examples, and we need to talk about some because they're important. I actually have one. But if you read, when I first heard about this rhubarb, I read the framework myself, and I came across thinking that it was too leftist. And it seems to be imbued with identity group politics, which is sort of the modern leftist worldview, which if that was part of the thing, that's fine, but it seems to be imbibed in the entire thread of U.S. history. And, you know, here's a perfect example for talking about the Industrial Revolution. International and internal migrations increased both urban and rural populations, but gender, racial, ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic inequalities abounded, inspiring reformers' attempt to address inequalities. There was reform during that time, but you see that kind of phraseology just all over and over and over in the framework. And since the old framework was much shorter, as you said, for the College Board, how do I not interpret that as you're trying to put that sort of ideology as a sort of the background message for all of AP U.S. history?
The statement I've heard Mr. Krieger make that I agree with is that when you go from short terms like civil rights movement towards a sentence, it is very easy for words to be misused in ways that would create some sense of bias. I agree with that concern. And as I've said, the College Board's objective is to ensure that there is none of that there. A prime example is the statement about Reagan, right? There's a statement that the committee felt that they were really doing a great job of trying to show off how many different strategies and approaches Reagan implemented to address the Cold War. They felt that, if anything, they were being too aggressive in promoting him as a hero. that said, when the public saw this framework and they saw that term that he used, bellicose rhetoric, many people in the public felt that that term bellicose was a pejorative and that undercut Reagan's accomplishments. Because that was not our intent, we have already agreed to make that change. We will replace that word bellicose with assertive rhetoric that threatened military action. So there are things like that, and I think the example you've given is a good one as well, that we need to be very clear that in the importance of identifying racial and ethnic conflict within American history, and we would all agree that that is essential. One of the problems of the old framework is that there was not a single minority or female mentioned in the entire old framework, right? So we don't want to go back to that, but we need to ensure that that is not the dominant theme of American history, because there are other equally essential strands. So that is something we'll be taking a close look at during this review period.
I want to mention this to the other senators. I want to
the framework is broken down. It starts with these thematic learning objectives, and there are 7 within the framework. And I'd like to go to slide 2, which actually compares the theme under identity from the 2014 framework to the 2007 framework. Those are the 7 themes that are in the framework now. But if we go to the next slide, and I would like as you read those, you see that there's a distinct difference when we're talking about the American identity. And in the 2000 framework, we were viewing American national character and ideas about American exceptionalism. That seems to be absent from the 2014 framework, and the emphasis seems to be on the formation of gender, class, racial, and ethnic studies. And so I would like to ask both sides of the panel to respond to this and to tell us about the significance of the difference now that we don't seem to be focusing on American exceptionalism, and maybe even tell us what that concept means. So, go ahead.
Sure. If you turn to page 10 of the slides, we'd like your feedback on this, because we're absolutely happy to restore the term American exceptionalism to the framework, but I want you to see why it was removed. I just want you to have some information so that you can advise us appropriately. Again, we have no concerns about restoring that term. That term was removed from the framework. It used to say, as that slide says, that the students should study ideas about American exceptionalism. What that frequently turned into in the classroom, if you do a Google search for American exceptionalism, you'll see all sorts of articles tracing the term back to communists in the 1920s, talking about how negative America is. So our committee thought, we don't want students memorizing a term. We want students to actually study examples of American exceptionalism. So you can see on page 10 the changes we made. The old AP US History simply said ideas about American exceptionalism. The new AP US History, you can see the list of statements that are now in the framework. I hear claims, as you've heard today, that the framework is relentlessly negative. That simply is not what I see in the framework, or what the American Historical Association sees, or the Organization of American Historians. It is not negative to claim that the United States developed the world's first modern mass democracy. It is not negative to claim that America's establishment of ideals of self-government and personal liberty served as inspiration for the rest of the world. These things are American exceptionalism. We want these things. Our committee felt it was more appropriate to make sure that there was clarity about examples of American exceptionalism than simply to insert the term. But that said, we're happy to reinstate the term if our stakeholders feel that would be helpful.
Mr. Kurtz.
Sure.
Dr. Kurtz.
Exceptionalism in the framework, and if the framework has in any way reduced his teaching of American exceptionalism.
The first thing I'd like to point out is when I read SR 80, I sort of wanted to do a little exercise with my students to see if they were getting an anti-patriotic education from my perspective and from the perspective of the framework. So I asked a few students to come and spend their lunch period with me, and I gave them a copy of the framework in a red and a green pen, and I asked them to highlight everything in red that they thought was, derogatory towards the United States, things that they would be ashamed of as an American, and I asked them to underline everything in green that they felt they could be proud of as an American. And what the result was is that a fairly balanced approach with a lean towards the green. There was more green ink on that paper than there was red. The students' perspective is that it's a balanced framework and that overall they're proud to be Americans. Having sat in my class for 5 months with me teaching the framework, I teach American exceptionalism from day one. It's my first lesson. So I've taught it throughout the semester. So I see it in the framework.
Representative Dudgeon, and let me.
I have an overarching question I think is very important. College Board is trying to represent a college history class. And I think it is pretty much common knowledge that that academia is dominated by a leftist ideology. And if you do surveys of professors are 90-something%, and a lot of the extreme rhetoric coming out of academia is the left. So how does a College Board reconcile making a test that's a college test when probably the vast majority of college U.S. history classes are taught well to the left of the average American? How can you reconcile that with creating a balanced framework? Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's such a great question, and it's the exact task we've set for ourselves, because we've had the same concern, that without a framework that is more specific than that old 5-page one, it was very easy for AP test questions to show up that did not represent a balanced approach to American history. If you look on page 18, you'll see we did a blind study of the two exams, the old AP exam and the new exam, and had conservative reviewers look at them without knowing which one was the old exam and which one was the new exam. You can see their reaction on page 18. When we compared the old and new AP US history exams, we were surprised that the new exam actually felt more politically balanced. The subjects in the old exam certainly lean left politically, and Mr. Krieger's own materials sort of have pointed this out. While he hasn't advocated himself that the exam should be leftist by any means, his materials have acknowledged that those old exams leaned left. The focus on unions, the women's movement, minority issues, and environmental concerns clearly created an agenda within the old exam, whereas the new exam is more favorable toward America. References to the Civil War generally negative on the old exam, but positive in the new exam. There's an increased focus on objective facts rather than questions that appear simply designed to trip up students. So this is what we've attempted to do with this framework, to signal that we will not allow exam questions to be placed on an AP exam any longer unless we have signaled to the public that they represent a balanced concept. And that's the reason why we wanted to put in front of the public a more detailed concept outline. Rather than keeping that information confidential, we wanted to reveal that to the public and put pressure on all of us to ensure that it's balanced. Again, I accept the feedback. If there are concerns about it not yet being balanced, we want to know that. But it's not very helpful for us to hear just broad-based claims that it's all negative or all ideologically balanced, or ideologically imbalanced.
I'll be glad to go through my slideshow with you in just a second.
We want that feedback.
Sure.
We want that.
But Mr. Krager, would you?
Chairman, I know there's been some criticism about a lack of omission. You addressed that. You're not trying to de-emphasize the Founding Fathers, not leaving out Martin Luther King, things of that nature. But to my teacher friend there, I mean, different teachers approach things differently, but a lot of teachers are going to look at this framework and say, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on AP for the kids to make a 3 or above on the test. I mean, that is a huge pressure on those AP teachers. In fact, in Georgia, the CCRPI has bonus points for AP credit. And in my school, we have a ton of AP considerations, and I know how the teachers are looking at that test. So they're going to look, I think, at this framework to say, all right, I'm going to look in here for clues for what's going to be in my test. And so even though you say, okay, we're leaving this flexibility, there's examples of different people and topics are kind of sprinkled in as it says teachers have flexibility to use examples such as the following, blah, blah, blah. But I'm concerned that the framework, by calling out certain ones as examples, you're really leading the teachers into emphasizing those and then maybe leaving out a lot about the Founding Fathers. I know I asked my son when he went through the time on the Founding Fathers. I've been watching them. I've been had an active experiment going on in my house. And in my opinion, the amount of time spent on that part of such a critical part of American history was just way too short. And I think if you lead how the framework spaces, so I guess two questions. Is there enough time in the framework for the founding period of this country, which is just so critical to the American identity and American exceptionalism, and I think is so important? It seems like it's just very shortly covered in the framework. And then two, how do you ask and I have to do both these because I have to go to my DOT vote, but how do you answer the question of these specific examples? I know you say the teachers have the flexibility, but if I'm the teacher saying, I want to know what's on the test, I'm going to pick what's in this document. So two questions for the AP folks. And
maybe I'll take the lead and then to Mr. Hoagie. we agree that one of the great enemies to students developing a love for our country's founding is a rush through history. And we hear of history teachers saying, you know, in European history, I've got to kill Napoleon by Christmas, or else I won't get through things before the test. And we have worried about a similar rush through the founding of our country. We've been heartened to see teachers respond to the new framework and say that it gives them much more time. Our piloting of the framework said that the teachers freed up 21 additional class periods to focus on local priorities with the new framework versus the old. And their satisfaction level went from 24% up to 81% in terms of saying that the framework gives them the right balance of topics and flexibility. So 24 to 81 is a huge jump. We see no evidence from teachers that we should go back to the old framework. We want that 81 to be even higher. How is this playing out with you in your classroom?
Well, to give you some practical sort of examples, last year under the old outline, I made it to Reagan. That was the best I could do, and it was a dead run to Reagan because I felt like there was just so many discrete facts that my students had to know. Because I basically had to use the released exams to determine what I had to teach, because the old outline was so vague, I turned to the released exams because, as you said, I mean, my job is to get 3s, 4s, and 5s. So I went to the released exams and used that as clues because the outline, when I looked at the outline, I was like, what am I going to do with this? This only gives me a vague idea of what's tested. So then it ended up that I was trying to do this exhaustive teaching of every person, every piece of legislation, every Supreme Court case. And what it became was a recitation of facts. And the students who got 3s, 4s, and 5s were the students who were best at memorizing facts. And it wasn't an analysis. It wasn't interpretation. And I feel the new curriculum allows, the new framework, I should say, allows the students to slow down, to interpret, to analyze. And one thing I'd like to point out is that I may be misspeaking here, but I believe the rubric for the free response essays allows students to support, refute, or modify, which if a teacher teaches something contrary to the framework, I believe the student will still be rewarded if he can support it with historical evidence. That's my understanding, at least.
Mr. Dr.
Can we hear
Kurtz?
the other?
It sounds like it's about the timeline. What is the timeline for the College Board's implementation of changes based on the public review process?
That's the essence of it. And is there going to be a shift? Is there going to be a shift based upon the input you're getting from the various people in the various states?
So the timeline is the public review period ends on February 28th. We'll then assemble all of that feedback. We'll present it to a committee of professors and teachers that will meet throughout the months of March, April, and May. We'll then send this through an editorial sort of design and layout process to do the graphic design of the new framework, the sort of mechanics, the operations of it, and then we'll release it to the public in July. Yes, we will make substantive changes for incorporating any feedback that identifies intentional or unintentional ideological bias, because our objective is the same as yours, to have a framework that provides teachers with the flexibility that Mr. Hoagie has and many other teachers like him have claimed they now have, but that does not in any way put pressure on teachers to slant their course to the left or to the right. Our perspective is that the College Board's framework should not have any ideological bias. It sounds like Mr. Kurtz does not agree that any framework can ever do that states concepts. And that's fine. He is welcome to take the position that it is impossible to ever have a framework. The College Board does not believe this is impossible. We are partnered with the American Historical Association, Organization of American Historians, the National Council of History Educators. We have the leading historical organizations in the country backing this. We will make further changes, but I do not agree that it is relentlessly negative. Look at page 10. You tell me which is better. One reference to American exceptionalism, 7 references to positive elements of the founding of our country. So I'm not on the same page that this is a relentlessly negative document. I do think improvements need to be made, and we're committed to that.
One final question then. If you brought in a group of parents, not educators, and had them look at this, if you all really want to know what people think versus just legislators, just other educators, bring in a group of parents, like Representative Dudgeon said to you, okay? Sit down with a group of parents. Do that in various states after they look through this and get their input. Because, you know, at the end of the day, that's probably who really matters, because it's their kids. And I tell you right now, in reading through this, when I look through the practice exam, okay, and you told me it's better than it used to be because you never gave it out before. That's not the way I remember the world, and that's not minimizing the ugly either. I just thought it was too much. I'm just telling you as a layperson, I thought it was too much, and we'll see what y'all end up doing. But what's going to happen, unfortunately, okay, what this gentleman just said to you, they're going to say, well, this is what we got to go with, and there's a monopoly, and we can't do anything about it. Well, maybe you better start looking for alternatives. That's not a threat. That's just reality. So I think you all have to be prepared for that.
And we're not concerned about that. And I would argue that we do not have a monopoly. But right?
Yeah, I mean, can I just speak for a moment on that? Because you come back to that several times. I teach in a high school. I lose kids to joint enrollment every day. They do not have a monopoly. Students can choose to go and do joint enrollment and earn college credit. We lose them to Kennesaw State. I have a wonderful student that I lost to West Georgia.
Yeah.
So I don't see a monopoly here. They don't have to take the course. I beg them to take the course, but they choose not to. Their parents choose not to take it. There is no
and we think the
monopoly.
pressure you all
There
described
is-
No,
is
you
helpful.
misunderstood what I said. When I said monopoly, they're the only game in town to get 3, 4, and 5. That's called a monopoly.
But college credit can come from joint enrollment.
Well, I understand that, okay? But I thought we'd like to try to give every child who could the opportunity if they want to take AP history and were qualified. But if there's only one game in town, that's called a monopoly.
I mean, it's
Even
not-
I know that from my background.
I mean, the College Board emphasizes how many benefits come to parents from the college credit they get.
Correct.
There needs to be an alternative test that gives exactly the same kind of benefits, and we really don't have that now. And if you take a joint now, I'm guessing the colleges down here in Georgia are better, according to my taste, than some others. But I worry about the influence of the academics, even with joint enrollment. I worry when I hear things like the Organization of American Historians. Have a look at this piece I wrote called How the College Board Politicized U.S. History, and you'll see that the reason, a big part of the reason the framework is the way it is because the Organization of American Historians put out something called the La Pietra Report, which was all about globalizing U.S. history, de-emphasizing the national narrative. They have consulted with the Organization of American Historians. That's why we have the problem.
I'd like to remind y'all, I want to maintain the focus of the questions on the framework as much as possible. I think that's what we're discussing is the framework, and when we get into areas of opinion, it's hard to.
Panel, appreciate you being here. I wanted to commend you on one part of the framework. When you get in the progressive era, the idea of trust busting, the idea that you've got private organizations that move in and are able to corner parts of the market, create distortions of market forces. Consumers aren't served well, employees aren't served well, and then you sort of create this distortion that we recognize late 19th century government got involved, early 20th century to kind of break that up to create better general conditions. I think the framework handles that very well. In like order, the idea of any one entity, in this case the College Board, setting the framework, consulted by a lot of organizations, and we look at the impact that trusts had in sort of bending the economics of the late 19th century. Think about, what's really in question here, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is when you're talking about setting aside kids who would choose a dual enrollment track, taking kids that are in their high schools, they're going to have history taught in their high school setting. You're looking at the top 25%, maybe 30% of kids that are taking a curriculum that's in accordance with the framework. The reason there's concern, just as we talk about in the marketplace, this idea of trust, you're talking about the top 25% of American culture that is learning the whole sweep of the meaning of American history from one organization. Now, I will tell you, I wouldn't trust this legislature. I wouldn't trust my political party. I wouldn't trust another political party. I wouldn't trust any elected body to make the decision about what, over the course of a generation, 315 million Americans believe that the Constitution means. When I grew up and sort of looked at my understanding and started growing into my understanding of the Constitution, the idea of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the enumerated powers of Congress in the Constitution. I never learned that in school. That was written out of the Constitution effectively for me, until I was an adult. Because nowhere in the sweep of my American history education was this idea that the federal government was formed with certain limited enumerated powers. There's other things I'm sure I missed. I think the concern I would share is just as we talk about the impact in a relatively limited sphere of trust busting in the late 19th century, isn't it true that if one organization, even if it's a consortium of groups, that have one channel through which the top 25% of all American young people, and over the course of a generation, all American adults believe our nation, what it means, what the Constitution means, and what the full sweep of history means. You've got a great organization, I'm sure. It's not a critique of you. I'm just concerned that even though the framework hits the marks you're seeking to address, it's too much authority to give any one organization the power to influence what all Americans believe, or at least what the top 25% of Americans believe. Now, with that in mind, I'd like your thoughts, Mr. Packer. Would you welcome a multiplicity of organizations where there could be 2 or 3 or 4 college boards to give those kinds of choices, where one organization doesn't solely influence the elite, really the leadership class of Americans?
I think this is such a good and insightful sort of discussion to have, and I really appreciate the way you framed that question. So let me give 3 quick sort of sentences as responses. I have personally shared the concern that in the old state of AP, where teachers only had this 5-page topic outline and never saw the AP exams because they were only released once every 5 to 8 years, that the concerns you've just described were amplified, right? Because who knew what this top 25% were learning if there was this very vague framework and exams that were never shared with the public? So I have felt dismayed by the sort of condemnation and castigation the College Board has received by making what I see as to have been a very responsible move. To say no longer are we going to conceal the results of our survey of thousands of American colleges. We're a membership organization, so we are a consortia of 6,000 colleges and high schools. And so we do design AP not with I'm not writing the AP course materials, my staff aren't writing them. We bring together representatives from our 6,000 members, colleges and high schools. And I felt strongly that if we did not make that information public, if we did not share with the public what these colleges and high schools are saying will be on an AP exam, we were irresponsible. So I feel like this has been a bold and appropriate move, that we would not be in this situation where we're having conversations about ensuring balance in AP US history if we had not been forthcoming with this material. Because we see that as an appropriate move for us to make. Your general question, though, in terms of does the College Board think it would be healthy to have a number of organizations building high-quality academic coursework in US history so that consumers can choose? Personally, I'm always a believer in that. I believe that competition is a good thing, that it brings out the best in organizations. So I welcome that notion. It sounds like a notion that Professor Kurtz champions. But do I think that I would also ask for respect, and respect that I do not feel has been forthcoming, related to the moves the College Board has made, to recognize the responsibility we hold to do right in history classrooms. And a first and important step towards that is making available to the public the results of these surveys of colleges and universities and high schools that identify what all these institutions say they value for college credit. And that's what we've tried to do. And that's brought us to a position where it's not surprising that this, that in the first year of a framework we would recognize areas for improvement, but it is surprising the level of misrepresentation and approbation or disapprobation that has been heaped upon the College Board for what I see as an organization really doing the right thing by our stakeholders.
And again, I asked that question because, and I appreciate you being willing to say that publicly, because from Jefferson to Madison to Frederick Douglass.
Most of that comment entirely. The descriptions of the scoring of the exam were not accurate. The descriptions of the points were not accurate. But I'd like the teacher to speak to the issue of flexibility. It's back to your original question. What do you make of all of this? As a teacher who's facing the exam and feels the same pressure that Mr. Krieger feels to help students get 5s.
Okay, so I entered this discussion coming from a background in global studies. Most of my graduate work was as a globalist studying world history as a whole. And the way we, as world history historians, study things is we use case study approaches. We teach students, there's no way to teach all of world history, that's obvious. So instead we teach examples, and then we teach our students how to use those examples to predict the correct answer in other situations. That's how I see the flexibility. I don't need to teach the students every single progressive reformer. I can teach them one progressive reformer, teach them the pattern of the progressive age, and if a different situation appears on the exam, it's a stimulus-based question. So the students aren't approaching that multiple choice with nothing to work with. Instead, they're given a document, primary source document or a picture, something to work with. So they use the material they're given, that primary source document, plus the patterns that I have taught them, and then the flexibility works. The students can score. My students score quite well.
I think Senator Ligon wants to read one line.
I have no concerns about that. I do think we should underscore a key point just for your consideration. It was a really important moment a few minutes ago when Mr. Krieger said that his position should be that the College Board's framework should specify the Greensboro 4. Now, I know that we want to leave the Greensboro 4 behind, but what that would mean is that we would be saying to states like most states that do not have the Greensboro 4 in their standards, that we are requiring them to teach that. We are not going to take that position. We are not going to produce a framework that is the College Board listing all of the names that must be studied in every state, because that would be a complete violation of local control. We will persist with a framework that we need to strip of any ideological bias, but we will persist with a framework that does not contain names so that teachers like Mr. Hoagie and Mr. Krieger and others can select the content that they want to focus on in their states.
Well, I wouldn't prejudge what the alternative testing companies are going to do, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if you get a couple alternative